Victoria's perfectly manicured fingers tapped against her Hermes bag as the lawyer announced that I'd inherited David's old farmhouse, the same place she'd called that dumpy shack at Thanksgiving. Her face went pale the moment she realized the beach mansion and the $300 million couldn't save her from whatever was coming. 3 days later, I found out exactly why she'd looked like she'd seen a ghost. If you're watching this, subscribe and tell me where you're watching from. But let me back up and explain how a 68-year-old widow ended up uncovering her son's murder when everyone else believed it was just a terrible accident. 2 weeks ago, my David died in a car crash on Highway 9, a single-vehicle collision late at night, no witnesses. The police blamed driver fatigue. Victoria cried beautifully at the funeral, playing the grieving widow in a black dress that probably cost more than my monthly pension. I knew something was wrong the moment she insisted on a private burial. Just family, she'd murmured, dabbing her eyes with a lace handkerchief. David had dozens of friends who wanted to pay their respects, but Victoria claimed she was too fragile for a larger service. The will reading was even stranger. David's lawyer, Mr. Patterson, looked confused as he read the terms. Most of the estate the tech company David built from nothing, the Malibu beach house. The investments all went to Victoria. Fair enough. She was his wife. But then came the surprise. To my mother, Margaret Sullivan, I leave the family farmhouse in Pine Valley along with all contents therein. She will understand its significance. I hadn't been to that farmhouse in 15 years. David bought it as a weekend retreat but barely used it. Victoria always wrinkled her nose when it was mentioned, calling it rustic in a tone that made the word sound like an insult. What exactly am I supposed to do with a rundown cabin? I'd asked Patterson privately after the reading. His expression turned uncomfortably serious. David specifically requested that you go there alone. Mrs. Sullivan, he said you'd know what to do. Victoria was oddly eager to help me pack for my trip to Pine Valley. She even offered to have the house cleaned before I arrived. But something in her voice made me refuse. If David wanted me to see something, I needed to see it exactly as he left it. The 3-hour drive gave me too much time to think about the son I apparently never truly knew. David was always secretive about his work, brushing off my questions with boring tech stuff. Over the last year, he'd grown distant, canceled our dinners, skipped family gatherings. I blamed Victoria, but now I wasn't so sure. The farmhouse sat at the end of a winding dirt road, surrounded by pine trees that swallowed most of the afternoon light. It looked exactly as I remembered, weathered wood siding, a wraparound porch, and that creaky front door that never latched right. But the moment I stepped inside, something felt off. The air wasn't abandoned stale, it was recently lived in stale. Very recently. The coffee pot was still warm. I stared at the nearly full carafe sitting on the counter. That definitely hadn't been there when David died 2 weeks ago. Unless the coffee fairy had moved in. Someone had been making themselves comfortable in my inheritance. The smart thing would have been to call the police right then. Instead, I did what any sensible grandmother with a backbone would do. I poured myself a cup and started walking through the house. If someone was going to break into my place, the least they could do was make good coffee. They did. The living room looked normal enough except for David's reading chair, which had been moved so it faced the window with a clear view of the driveway. A pair of binoculars sat on the side table beside a notebook full of license plate numbers, written in David's handwriting. The dates went back 6 months. The most recent entry was from the day before he died. Interesting hobby, David, I muttered, flipping through the pages. My tech executive son had apparently been playing detective. But investigating what? Part of the answer was waiting upstairs, behind a loose floorboard under his bed. One found a metal box stuffed with documents, photographs, and financial records. But not just any records, bank statements showing massive transfers from shell companies, cryptocurrency transactions, deposits that didn't match Victoria's polished explanation of David's successful tech business. The photos were even more disturbing. Victoria meeting with unfamiliar men in parking garages, restaurants, and what looked like an offshore banking office in the Cayman Islands. All the photos were taken with a telephoto lens, each one carefully dated and catalogued. David had been investigating his own wife. The most recent photo was stamped just 5 days before he died. Victoria shaking hands with a man I recognized from the business section of the newspaper. Anthony Marchetti, currently under federal investigation for money laundering. I sat back on my heels, the pieces of a very ugly puzzle starting to fall into place. David's successful tech company wasn't just successful, it was laundering money for some extremely unpleasant people. Victoria wasn't the grieving widow. She was his business partner, and David had figured it out. The sound of gravel crunching in the driveway made me freeze. A car was coming up the road, moving slowly like someone who knew exactly where they were going. I shoved the most dangerous documents and photos into my purse, replaced the floorboard, and hurried to the living room window just in time to see a sleek black sedan pull up next to my ancient Honda. Victoria stepped out, not the fragile widow from the funeral, but a woman with purpose. She checked her phone, then walked straight toward the house. She had a key. I had about 30 seconds to decide whether to hide or confront her. The smart choice was hiding, but I've never been accused of being too smart for my own good. Hello, Victoria, I said cheerfully as she walked right in like she owned the place, which, technically, she didn't. Lovely day for a drive to the country. She jumped at least 3 feet, grabbing her chest with a dramatic flair that would make a soap opera actress jealous. Margaret, I didn't expect. I thought you were coming tomorrow, clearly, I said, gesturing to the coffee pot. Though someone's been expecting something. That coffee is still warm. Her eyes flicked toward the kitchen, then back to me. I could practically see her calculating. Victoria had always been beautiful in that cold, perfect way that made other women feel inadequate. But today, she looked exhausted, stressed in a way that had nothing to do with grief. I've been coming here to feel close to David, she said, tears appearing on cue. This was our special place. Funny, I replied, he never mentioned bringing you here. In fact, I distinctly remember him saying you hated it. I settled into David's reading chair and watched her flinch as I picked up the binoculars. What exactly were you two looking for out here? I asked. She let out a laugh pitched just a little too high. We weren't looking for anything. We just enjoyed the peace and quiet, with binoculars and surveillance notes. I held up the notebook. David kept track of every car that came down this road for the past 6 months, including yours. 12 visits. Always on Thursdays. Always staying exactly 2 hours. The tears vanished instantly. Victoria's mask slipped, revealing the cold calculation underneath. You don't understand what you're dealing with, Margaret. David was paranoid toward the end. Obsessed with conspiracy theories like money laundering, I said. Or conspiracy theories like faking financial records. I pulled out one of the bank statements. This shows a deposit of $2 million from a company that doesn't exist. Victoria, David may have been many things, but paranoid wasn't one of them. She went completely still. When she finally spoke, her voice had lost the last traces of grief. You need to stop digging. Margaret, for your own safety, is that a threat? It's practical advice from someone who knows more about this situation than you do. She moved toward the door, then paused. David was getting ready to do something very stupid. Something that would have destroyed everything we built together. His death was unfortunate timing. The way she said unfortunate timing made my blood run cold. Are you telling me my son's death wasn't an accident? She smiled, an honest smile, the first truly genuine one I'd ever seen from her. I'm telling you that accidents happen to people who don't know when to stop asking questions. After she left, I sat in the growing darkness, my thoughts racing. David hadn't just been investigating Victoria's business dealings, he'd been building a case against her, meticulously, quietly, carefully, and now all that evidence was tucked away in a farmhouse he left to me for a reason. Victoria had realized what he was planning, and now she was inheriting everything while he was 6 feet underground. I pulled out my phone to call the police, then hesitated. What proof did I actually have? Photos and financial documents that could be explained away. The word of a grieving mother against that of a well-dressed widow with very expensive lawyers. No, I needed more, and I had a feeling David had left more than just a box of documents inside that house. The basement had always been where David hid his treasures as a boy: baseball cards, comic books, and the bottle of whiskey he'd swiped from his father's cabinet at 16. I'd pretended not to know about his secret hiding spots, but mothers know everything. Apparently, some habits never change. The modern security system built into the basement wall was definitely not original to this 1940s farmhouse. Hidden behind what looked like an electrical panel was a sophisticated digital safe, complete with a biometric scanner and enough warning labels to supply a hazardous materials facility. David's thumbprint, of course, wouldn't help me now, but he'd always been a belt and suspenders kind of kid when it came to backups. I found the manual override key exactly where I expected it, taped inside the old mason jar labeled Grandma's cookies that had belonged to my mother. Some family traditions apparently ran deeper than money laundering and murder. The safe contained enough evidence to put Victoria away for several lifetimes. Financial records showing the systematic theft of millions from David's legitimate tech business to fund what looked like an international cryptocurrency laundering operation. Email printouts detailing meetings with known criminals, and a detailed timeline showing how Victoria had gradually taken control of every part of David's business while he was too distracted by what he thought was their marriage. But the real prize was David's laptop still. logged in and containing his full investigation. Video files, recorded conversations, and a detailed confession he seemed to be preparing for the FBI. The final video was dated the day before he died. David looked exhausted, speaking into the camera with the resignation of someone who knows he's about to blow up his entire life. If you're watching this, Mom, it means I didn't make it to my meeting with the FBI tomorrow. Victoria doesn't know about this safe, but if something happens to me, she'll come looking for the evidence I've been collecting. I need you to know that everything I did to protect you. He paused, running a hand through his hair, the same nervous gesture he'd made since childhood. Whenever he faced a hard decision, Victoria threatened you specifically. Mom, she said if I turned state's evidence, her associates would make sure you paid the price. I couldn't let that happen. But I also couldn't keep pretending I didn't know what she was doing. So I made a different plan. The video continued with David explaining how he had secretly transferred legitimate assets into my name months earlier using the farmhouse inheritance as cover. Victoria thought she was inheriting everything, but most of what she'd been given were shell companies full of debt and federal seizure orders waiting to activate. The FBI raid should happen within 48 hours of my death, David said. I've set up an automated system to deliver all this evidence if I don't check in every 24 hours. Victoria will be arrested, her associates will be neutralized, and you'll be safe. The only thing I need you to do is stay away from the beach house until it's over. The timestamp showed he recorded it 18 hours before his death. 18 hours before what Victoria called his accident. I sat back, trying to absorb the implications. My son had effectively faked his own death to protect me and take down his wife's criminal operation. Except something had gone wrong because Victoria was still free and the FBI raid hadn't happened. That meant David's automated system had failed, and I was sitting on evidence that could expose the biggest money laundering operation the feds had seen in years. The sound of multiple vehicles crunching up the driveway made me freeze. Through the basement window, I saw headlights, too many headlights approaching the house. Apparently, Victoria had decided I was asking too many questions. 3 black SUVs in the driveway meant this wasn't a social call. I had maybe 2 minutes before they realized I wasn't answering the door and invited themselves in. Enough time to make a choice that could save my life or end it spectacularly. I grabbed David's laptop, stuffed the most incriminating evidence into a waterproof bag, and did something I hadn't done since I was 12 years old. I crawled out through the basement window. Thank goodness for small mercies and the fact that I'd kept up with yoga at the senior center. Getting back through that window would be another matter, assuming I lived that long. The woods behind the farmhouse were dense enough to hide in, but familiar enough that I wouldn't get lost. David and I had hiked those trails dozens of times when he was little, back when he thought I was the smartest woman in the world rather than an obstacle to his criminal empire. From my hiding spot behind a massive pine tree, I watched Victoria direct her associates like a general. They moved with professional efficiency, sweeping the house room by room. These weren't thugs. These were people with training and expensive equipment. One of them found the open basement safe within minutes. Victoria's voice carried clearly in the cold air as she screamed at them for being too late. Apparently, losing millions in evidence makes even the most composed criminals lose their temper. She has everything, Victoria shouted into her phone. David's laptop, the financial records, probably the video files. We need to find her before she gets to the FBI. The man on the other end must have asked the obvious question: why they hadn't simply killed me already, because Victoria's response was illuminating, because we don't know what automatic triggers David set up. If his mother dies under suspicious circumstances, it might activate fail-safes we haven't found yet. We need to recover the evidence first, then make it look like an accident. Just like we did with David. There it was. Confirmation that my son's death had been murder, delivered with the casual indifference of someone discussing the weather. I'd heard enough. Time to find out whether David's backup plan came with its own backup plans. The hiking trail behind the farmhouse led to an old logging road that connected to the main highway. About 2 miles away, my ancient Honda would never outrun their SUVs. But it might not have to. David had always been paranoid about cell phone tracking. So the laptop bag contained something I hadn't seen in years: a satellite phone. Its contact list had only 3 numbers, one labeled FBI Morrison, one labeled insurance, and one labeled Mom Emergency. I tried FBI Morrison first. A tired voice answered on the second ring. Morrison, Detective Morrison, my name is Margaret Sullivan. My son David was supposed to meet with you 2 weeks ago about a money laundering investigation. Long pause. Mrs. Sullivan, I'm sorry for your loss. David's death was a tragedy, but our meeting was canceled when circumstances changed. What circumstances? Ma'am, I can't discuss ongoing investigations. But if you have information related to your son's business activities, I'd be happy to meet with you tomorrow morning, Detective Morrison. I am currently hiding in the woods behind my son's farmhouse, while his widow and several armed associates search for evidence that proves she murdered him. Tomorrow morning might be too optimistic. Another pause, longer this time. That double quotes Mrs. Sullivan. Where exactly are you right now? I gave him my location along with a quick summary of what I'd found in David's safe. Morrison's breathing shifted as I described the documents, and I could hear him typing, "Ma'am, stay hidden until we can get units to you. We've been investigating Victoria Sullivan and her associates for 8 months. But we lost our inside source when David died. If you have his complete files, Detective, my son recorded a confession video. He said he was going to turn state's evidence. He also said Victoria threatened to kill me if he testified. Does that sound like someone who died in an accident?" "No, Mrs. Sullivan, it doesn't. Stay on the line and keep moving toward the highway. We're coming to get you." Through the trees, flashlights swept across the darkness. Victoria's people had realized I'd escaped and were starting a systematic search. Professional or not, they were about to learn that hunting a 68-year-old woman in terrain she'd known for decades was much harder than it looked, but I had one more call to make first. Mom. Emergency, connected to a number I didn't recognize, but the voice that answered was unmistakably familiar. "Margaret? Thank God, are you safe?" "David," my knees almost buckled. I gripped a tree for support, trying to understand what I was hearing. "David, you're supposed to be dead." "I am dead, Mom, officially. And it needs to stay that way for a few more hours. Until the FBI finishes rounding up Victoria's network." "Are you somewhere secure?" The relief of hearing my son's voice was instantly replaced by the urge to wring his neck. "Secure? I'm hiding in the woods behind your farmhouse while your homicidal wife hunts me with what appears to be a small army. How exactly is this part of your plan? It wasn't supposed to happen this way. You were supposed to find the evidence tomorrow after the arrests were made. Victoria wasn't supposed to realize you'd been to the house." His voice was tense, strained. "Mom, I'm sorry. I never meant to put you in danger. Where are you? Where are you?" "Federal protection. I've been working with the FBI for the past year to build a case against Victoria and her associates. The car accident was staged so they'd think their inside source was gone. It was supposed to buy us time to gather evidence on the rest of the network." I could hear vehicles turning onto the logging road. Morrison's people, or Victoria's reinforcements. Either way, my hiding spot wasn't going to stay safe much longer. "David, I need to know, how many people are we talking about here? Because your wife just brought enough firepower to invade a small country." "Victoria's organization launders money for 3 different criminal enterprises," he said, "including 2 on the FBI's most wanted list. They've killed people for less than what you discovered tonight." "Wonderful," I muttered. "Any other encouraging news you'd like to share while I'm running for my life?" "Actually, yes. The cavalry should be arriving any minute now. I've been tracking your location through the satellite phone, and we've got federal agents converging on your position from 3 directions. And Victoria's people are being tracked too. Mom, I need you to stay on the line and keep moving toward the highway. Don't trust anyone until you see FBI badges. And whatever you do, don't give up that laptop bag." Through the trees ahead, I saw flashing lights, lots of them. Red and blue. Not the harsh white beams Victoria's people had been using. Either the FBI had arrived in force, or Victoria had somehow managed to steal police cars. "David, one more question," I said, breathless. "If this was all an elaborate plan to catch the bad guys, why did it feel like you were saying goodbye in that video message?" The silence stretched so long I thought the connection had dropped. "Because I wasn't sure I'd survive staging my death," he finally said. "Mom, Victoria had been having me followed for weeks. If the plan had gone wrong, if they'd caught me before the FBI could extract me." His voice cracked. "I needed you to know everything I did was to protect you, even if it meant you'd hate me for lying." Footsteps crashed through the underbrush behind me, multiple sets. "Fast. I could never hate you, David," I said. "But next time you decide to fake your own death, maybe give your mother a heads up first." His laugh was shaky but real. "Deal. Now keep moving, Mom, and remember, trust no one until you see Detective Morrison in person. He's 6'2", gray hair, and he'll know the password. Baseball cards in the mason jar." The flashing lights were getting closer now, and I could hear voices calling my name, professional voices, calm, controlled. The kind that belonged to people trained for hostage recovery. I was about to find out if David's elaborate plan had actually worked, or if we'd both just signed our own death warrants. But first, I was going to have a very serious conversation with my son about the definition of protecting your mother. Detective Morrison was exactly as advertised, 6'2", gray hair, and the steady presence of a man who'd talked more than one person down from the edge of something. "Hi." When he said, "baseball cards in the mason jar," I nearly cried with relief. Double quotes Mrs. Sullivan. "We need to get you to a secure location immediately," he said, gesturing to a black SUV that looked suspiciously like the ones Victoria had arrived in. "Your son's evidence is more valuable than you realize, more valuable than exposing a multi-million-dollar money laundering operation." I clutched David's laptop bag closer. "What exactly has my son gotten himself mixed up in?" Morrison exchanged a look with his partner, a sharp-eyed woman who introduced herself as Agent Chen. "Ma'am," Chen said, "your daughter-in-law isn't just laundering money. She's been funneling cryptocurrency to terrorist organizations overseas. We're talking national security implications." I stared at her. "You're telling me Victoria went from trophy wife to international terrorist financier? That seems like quite a career leap, according to your son's intelligence," Chen said, opening a tablet with surveillance photos of Victoria meeting with people. Straight out of a crime thriller, she was never just a trophy wife. Victoria Marchetti, her real name, has been working for her father's organization since college. She married David specifically to access his tech expertise and use his company as a front. She's been playing the long game for 8 years, gaining access to his systems and building a network of shell companies. And David figured this out eventually, Morrison added. But by then she was so deeply embedded in his business that exposing her would have meant destroying everything he'd built. Until he found evidence she was planning to eliminate him anyway. The SUV pulled into what looked like a federal building, security checkpoints everywhere, enough to protect the Pentagon. As we walked through each one, Morrison kept talking. "The problem is Victoria's network extends beyond what David documented. We've been tracking payments to at least 15 criminal organizations, including to that specialize in eliminating federal witnesses." "Is that why you needed David to fake his death?" "It was his idea," Morrison said. "He knew Victoria would never stop hunting him if she thought he was alive. But if she believed he was dead, she'd focus on covering her tracks instead of eliminating threats." We entered a conference room and there he was, David, alive, exhausted, familiar, wonderful. I hugged him hard enough to crack ribs. Then I immediately started lecturing him about giving his mother heart attacks. "I'm sorry, Mom," David said, "but we needed Victoria to feel safe enough to start moving money again. We've been tracking every transaction since my death, and tonight she's attempting to transfer $50 million to accounts in 3 different countries, which will be stopping," Agent Chen added, "along with arresting everyone involved in the transfer." David pulled up financial records on his laptop. The beauty of Victoria's operation is that she documented everything. She couldn't resist keeping detailed records of her success, every transaction, every meeting, every criminal contact. "It's all in her private files you accessed," I said. "How exactly?" He grinned. "I designed her security system, Mom. She changed the passwords, but not the back doors." The pieces were finally coming together, but something still bothered me about the timing. Victoria had seemed genuinely shocked at the will reading when she learned about the farmhouse. If she'd been planning to eliminate David anyway, why hadn't she known about his preparations? The answer came with Agent Chen's next revelation, and it was far more disturbing than international terrorism. "Mrs. Sullivan, we need you to understand that this operation is bigger than just Victoria. Her father's organization has been infiltrating tech companies across the country, using marriages and romantic relationships to gain access to systems and expertise." She pulled up a map filled with dots across major cities. David's company was target number 12. Victoria was assigned to him, specifically because his security software was being used by several banks we now know were being robbed from the inside. "You're telling me my son was targeted for marriage by professional criminals?" "I'm telling you that Victoria Marchetti is what we call a honey trap specialist," Chen said. "She's done this before at least 3 times that we can document. The previous targets all died in accidents after their usefulness ended." David's face went pale. "You never told me about the other husbands." Morrison leaned back in his chair. "We were hoping to avoid traumatizing you further, but given tonight's events, you need to understand what you're dealing with. Victoria's first husband died in a skiing accident after she drained his software company's bank accounts. The second died in a boating accident after she used his biotech firm to smuggle laboratory equipment overseas. And the third? A house fire made to look electrical right after she used his defense contracting company to steal military encryption codes." I felt sick. "So David would have been number 4, except David figured it out in time," Morrison said. "The problem is, Victoria's father's organization doesn't tolerate failure. When she couldn't deliver David's death and complete access to his systems, They sent reinforcements, the people who came to the farmhouse tonight, among others. We've identified at least 12 operatives who arrived in the area over the past 48 hours. They're not just here to recover evidence. They're here to clean up loose ends. David suddenly stood and paced to the window. Mom, there's something else. The reason Victoria was so shocked about the farmhouse inheritance wasn't because she didn't know about it, it's because she thought I'd hidden something else there. What kind of something else? The master key to her father's entire network. Financial records, contact lists, operational details for every criminal enterprise they're connected to. I told her I'd created it as insurance, but I never told her where it was hidden. Agent Chen's eyes sharpened. Does this master key exist? Oh, it exists, David said. And it's not hidden at the farmhouse. He turned toward me with the same expression he had as a kid when he was about to reveal. He'd been 3 steps ahead of everyone else. Mom, remember how I always hid my most important things in the last place anyone would think to look? I thought back to all the times I'd found his treasures tucked away in plain sight. You hid it at home, I said slowly. Your real home. Not just home. I hid it with the person Victoria would never suspect of being involved in any of this. The realization hit me like a physical blow. It's at my house. You hid it at my house, in Grandma's cookie jar, to be specific, he said. The same jar where I used to hide my allowance money. Victoria's met you dozens of times over the years, and she's never seen you as anything more than a harmless old woman who bakes cookies and asks when she's going to have grandchildren. Agent Chen was already reaching for her radio. We need a team at Mrs. Sullivan's residence immediately. Wait, Morrison said, holding up a hand. If Victoria's people realize what David hid there, they'll tear the place apart looking for it. Mrs. Sullivan, is there any chance they'd think to search your home? I thought about it. Victoria had always been condescendingly polite to me, treating me like a relic from David's past, something to be tolerated, never taken seriously. She'd visited my house exactly twice in 8 years of marriage, both times spending the entire visit glued to her phone and making excuses to leave early. No, I said slowly. She thinks I'm a harmless old widow who spends her time watching game shows and watering houseplants. Then we have an advantage she doesn't know about, Morrison said. But we need to retrieve that information before she figures out where it is. David shook his head. It's too dangerous. I won't put Mom at risk again. You won't be putting me at risk, I said firmly. I'm volunteering. Going back to my own house felt surreal after everything that had happened. The FBI had stationed agents throughout the neighborhood, but they were practically invisible, hidden in landscaping trucks, sitting in driveways like visiting relatives. To anyone watching, I was just a grieving mother, returning home after a long day of settling her son's affairs. The cookie jar sat exactly where it had been for the past 15 years, on the kitchen counter next to the coffee maker. Completely unremarkable, totally overlooked, and containing what was possibly the most valuable intelligence the FBI had gathered in years. David hadn't been exaggerating. The tiny USB drive hidden among the ceramic cookies held financial records that read like a directory of international crime names, account numbers, operational details, and enough evidence to dismantle networks spanning 3 continents. Your son is either brilliant or completely insane, Agent Chen said through my earpiece as I downloaded the files onto a secure FBI laptop. Possibly both. He gets that from his father, I replied. The brilliant part, anyway, the insanity is all mine. I had just finished the file transfer when my home security system chimed. Someone was at my front door. The FBI surveillance team's voice crackled in my ear immediately. Mrs. Sullivan, stay calm. We have visual onto individuals approaching your front door. One appears to be Victoria Sullivan. Through the peephole, I saw Victoria standing on my porch, looking every inch the bereaved widow. She was alone except for one man in an expensive suit who looked like he belonged in a boardroom, not breaking into suburban homes. Mrs. Sullivan, Morrison's voice was tense. Do not answer that door. We're moving agents into position now, but I was already turning the deadbolt. Sometimes you just have to trust your instincts. And mine were telling me that running and hiding weren't going to solve this problem. Hello, Victoria, I said pleasantly, opening the door with the same warm smile I'd been using on unwelcome visitors for decades. This is a surprise. I wasn't expecting to see you again so soon. Her smile matched mine, warm, perfectly pleasant, and completely false. Margaret, I hope you don't mind the intrusion. This is my attorney, Mr. Reeves. We were hoping to discuss David's estate with you, of course. Please come in. I stepped back, watching her eyes immediately sweep over the living room, cataloging everything. She was looking for something specific. Mr. Reeves didn't even bother pretending he moved through my house like he was taking inventory, examining everything from my bookshelf to my houseplants with sharp, Professional interest, Margaret, Victoria said as she settled onto my sofa. Posture perfect, tone dripping with concern. I realize today has been overwhelming for you finding David's things at the farmhouse. Dealing with all that confusing paperwork, it has been quite a day, I agreed. Pouring tea from the pot I'd prepared before their arrival. Though I have to say, some of David's papers were more interesting than confusing. Her hand froze halfway to her teacup. Oh, financial records mostly. Investment accounts I didn't know he had. Business partnerships that seemed rather international. I watched her face closely. I had no idea David's business was so diversified. Mr. Reeves had stopped pretending to admire the china cabinet. He stood directly behind my chair, now classic bodyguard positioning. It hit me then, Victoria wasn't here to chat, Margaret, she said smoothly. Some of those papers might be sensitive business documents. That should be returned to David's lawyers. For legal reasons, I'm sure you're right, I said. In fact, I've already taken care of that. I turned everything over to the FBI this afternoon. The silence that followed was so complete I could hear the kitchen clock ticking from the next room. Victoria's face didn't change, not really, but something behind her eyes did. A rapid recalculation. The FBI? She repeated, voice still perfectly controlled. Whatever for? They said there might be irregularities in David's business practices that need investigation. Something about international transactions and money laundering. I sipped my tea innocently. I'm sure it's just a formality. Victoria laughed, a sharp, brittle sound like breaking glass. Oh, Margaret, she said softly. You have no idea what you've done. Mr. Reeves moved closer, shifting so that his body was now squarely between me and the front door. Whatever warm family conversation Victoria had planned, it was gone. I know exactly what I've done, I said calmly. I've helped expose a criminal organization that murdered my son. Murdered? Victoria's eyes went wide with theatrical shock. Margaret, David died in a car accident. You were at the funeral. I was at a funeral for an empty casket. Victoria. Or should I call you Victoria Marchetti? I understand that's your real name. This time her mask didn't just slip, it shattered completely. The grieving widow vanished, replaced by someone cold, calculating, and genuinely dangerous. You stupid old woman, she said softly. Do you understand what you've cost me? What you've cost my family? Your family of international criminals? I'd say I've cost them exactly what they deserved. Mr. Reeves pulled out his phone, speaking rapidly in what sounded like Italian. Victoria stood up, no longer bothering with politeness. David was supposed to die quietly, and you were supposed to grieve quietly. And none of this was supposed to involve federal agents. She began pacing, her perfect composure cracking with every step. But you couldn't leave well enough alone, could you? You threatened to kill me if David testified against you. Did you really think I'd just let that slide? I threatened you because David needed motivation to keep his mouth shut. But he was always too sentimental about family. She paused at my mantel, picking up a framed photo of David as a child. It's ironic, really. His love for you is what made him so easy to manipulate in the beginning. And it's what made him so dangerous in the end. Dangerous how? Victoria smiled, and for the first time since I'd known her, it reached her eyes. Because he thought faking his death would protect you. He thought if I believed he was dead, I'd take my money and disappear. But David never understood the family business. She set the photo down gently, almost reverently. We don't leave loose ends, Margaret. We never have. Mr. Reeves finished his phone call and gave her a small nod. Whatever he'd arranged was complete. She looked satisfied. The good news is this will all be over soon. The bad news is you're going to have a very unfortunate accident. I glanced around my living room, mentally marking where the FBI agents I couldn't see were positioned. Victoria and Mr. Reeves were standing in front of the window, perfect for the surveillance cameras. Hidden in my neighbor's tree. Before I have my unfortunate accident, I said conversationally, would you mind satisfying an old woman's curiosity? About what? How long have you been planning this? The marriage to David, the money laundering. All of it. Victoria looked at Mr. Reeves. He checked his watch, then nodded. Apparently they had time for one last villain monologue. 12 years, she said. I spent 4 years in computer science classes, learning everything I needed to understand David's work. 2 years building a fake identity and backstory. Then 6 years of marriage, slowly gaining access to his systems and his trust. And you never felt anything for him, not even a little? Her expression softened briefly. David was kinder than I expected. More genuine. There were moments when I almost regretted what I had to do. Almost. But business is business. Margaret, and family is family. Mr. Reeves stepped toward me. Our conversation was over. Whatever the FBI had planned needed to happen now. Just one more question, I said quickly. If you've been planning this for 12 years, how did David figure it out? Victoria's smile turned triumphant. He didn't figure it out, Margaret. We told him. I froze. What? 6 months ago, my father's organization decided David had served his purpose. We told him exactly who I was, what I'd been doing, and what was going to happen to him. Her eyes glittered with malicious satisfaction. We wanted him to know that everything he'd believed about his life was a lie. The cruelty of it stole my breath. They hadn't just planned to kill David, they wanted him to suffer first. That's when he contacted the FBI, I whispered. That's when he signed his own death warrant. Victoria corrected. And yours. Mr. Reeves reached into his jacket and I closed my eyes, thinking of David and desperately hoping the FBI's timing was better than mine. The sound that followed wasn't gunfire. It was my front door exploding inward as federal agents stormed my living room like an avenging army. Victoria dubbed behind my sofa. Mr. Reeves spun toward the agents with his weapon drawn, and I did what any sensible grandmother does in a shootout. I hit the floor and stayed there. The entire confrontation lasted maybe 30 seconds. When the shouting stopped and I opened my eyes, Victoria was in handcuffs and Mr. Reeves was being read his rights by Agent Chen. Mrs. Sullivan, Morrison said as he helped me to my feet, checking me for injuries. Are you hurt? Only my pride, I said, brushing dust off my cardigan. Though I have to say, your timing is impeccable. David burst through the front door, followed by what looked like half the FBI's field office. He pulled me into a hug that lifted my feet off the ground. Mom, when I heard they'd cornered you here, I thought your mother was too old and helpless to handle a couple of international criminals. I pulled back and looked at him sternly. David Sullivan, I raised you better than that, he laughed, tears streaming down his face. You're right. I should have known better. Agent Chen approached, looking thoroughly satisfied. Mrs. Sullivan, I need you to know that your cooperation tonight has helped us arrest not just Victoria and her associate, but 12 other members of their organization. The evidence your son collected, combined with what we gathered from tonight's operation, should put them away for life, and the master key files downloaded and secure. We've already begun tracing their financial networks and notifying international authorities. I glanced over at Victoria, sitting in one of my kitchen chairs with her hands cuffed behind her back. Even in custody, she held that perfect posture, though her mask had finally fallen away for good. She looked exactly like what she was, a predator who'd finally been caught. Victoria, I called. She looked up at me with pure hatred. I have one final question. Agent Chen started to object, but I raised a hand. This mattered. Did you ever even for a moment actually love my son? She stared at me for a long time, and for the first time I saw something flicker across her face. Pain, maybe. Or regret, yes, she said quietly. And that was my biggest mistake. As they led her away, I realized that was the most honest thing she had ever said to me. Later that evening, after the FBI had finished processing my house as a crime scene, and after David had been officially resurrected from the dead, we sat on my back porch drinking coffee and watching the sunset. So, what happens now? I asked. Now you get to be a normal grandmother again, David said. No more international conspiracies, no more fake deaths. No more criminal masterminds trying to kill you. Sounds boring, he laughed. Mom, most people would consider that a good thing. Most people haven't spent the last week discovering their ordinary lives were anything but ordinary. I sipped my coffee, thinking, David, why did you really choose to fake your death instead of just going into witness protection? He was quiet for a long time because Victoria told me that if I testified against her, her organization would torture you to death to make me watch. I couldn't risk that, Mom. I couldn't risk you. So you chose to let me think you were dead instead. I chose to protect you the only way I knew how. I reached over and squeezed his hand. Next time, maybe we could try just talking about it first. Next time. I promise to involve you in the planning stages. There'd better not be a next time. David Sullivan, he grinned. Well, I can't make any promises. After all, I get my sense of adventure from my mother. I looked out over my quiet suburban neighborhood, thinking about how ordinary it looked and how extraordinary the last week had been. Victoria had been right about one thing. I was just a harmless old woman who baked cookies and watered houseplants. But she'd been wrong about everything else. Harmless didn't mean helpless, and ordinary didn't mean defenseless. And sometimes the most dangerous enemies are the ones who underestimate the power of a mother protecting her child. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.